Well, good afternoon, and welcome to Sunday at 4 from Upper Trosnan Baptist Church. My name is Pastor Richard Miles. It's good to have you joining us again today. I don't know what the weather is like with you. Here in Pontypool, it is a nice, bright, sunny, warm day today. We've had a few days like that, and it looks like the weather's going to be the same over the next few weeks. And generally this summer we seem to have had a pretty good time of it weather-wise. I think most of the UK has been pretty much the same, to be honest. If you're watching from elsewhere, things might be different. But we've certainly had good weather. And the weather is something that we often talk about as British or Welsh people. We do discuss the weather quite a bit. And maybe one of the first things you say, you talk to somebody and say, hello, how are you? Nice day today, isn't it? Or it looks like it might rain later, or whatever it might be. The weather is a source of conversation. And as I was saying to somebody yesterday, I think the reason for that is probably because our weather is so changeable. If the weather was always the same, it wouldn't really be worth commenting on it because, yeah, sunny again today, like it's been every other day or whatever. But because here we get bright sunny days and then we get wet days and that sort of thing, then it becomes worth commenting on, doesn't it? Because it is so different. Now, maybe you're somebody who likes the warm weather. Maybe you like it to be like this. Maybe you prefer it to be a bit cooler. People are all different, aren't they? I must admit, a couple of weeks ago, we did have a couple of really very, very hot days, and it did seem to be too hot on those days, didn't it? But again, the weather is not only something we talk about, it's something we complain about. We were complaining then that the weather was too hot. But then, if it's too wet, we complain about that as well, don't we? Again, maybe that's part of the fact that weather here is so changeable, isn't it? But the thing is that we need to remember that the weather is something that does come from God, and God is in control of what happens as to whether we get bright sunshine, whether we get rain, whether we get snow in winter or icy conditions or whatever it might be. That God is the one who supplies the weather for us. And over the last few weeks, we've been looking at the way that God provides the things that we need for our lives in different ways. I think particularly about money and provisions and food and all those sorts of things. And those are all good things and important things that God provides. But God also provides the weather that we have in this country, and in fact, the weather that is there throughout the world. It is from Him. It doesn't just happen randomly. God is in control of it. And that's something that Jesus wanted to remind his disciples about in part of his teaching. I'm just going to read to you part of a verse from Matthew's Gospel, from Matthew chapter 5 and the end of verse 45. Where Jesus says this: He, that is God, causes his sun to shine on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Now, the point is, of course, that the weather as it is exactly the same for everybody. The point that Jesus is making here is that whether people follow him or not, whether people are evil or good, we still get the same weather. It isn't the case that if somebody is really, really bad, they spend all day under their own personal cloud of rain. Or if somebody is really good, they always get really warm weather or whatever it might be. No, it is the same for everybody. When the sun rises in the morning, it is the same for everybody. When it sets at night, it is also the same for everybody. And when rain comes, it is the same for everybody. It's not just those people who've done something really bad that get rained on, because we're told here that He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. And so that just tells us that God's gift of weather is for everybody, regardless of who they are. And that's something that's very important for us to remember. But even though that is the case, there are a few things that we do need to bear in mind. And the first of them is that this particular verse is actually, as I said, in the context of some teaching that Jesus is doing. And he's talking in this particular passage about people loving their enemies. And that's something that Jesus said that we are to do. Love those who are against us. Love our enemies. That's not a difficult thing, is it? Because very often, if people are our enemies, we won't want to love them. We'll want to be against them. We'll want to be nasty to them. We'll want to be horrible to them. Whereas Jesus is saying here, no, we're not to be like that. We are to love our enemies. We see it, don't we, again on social media all the time, the way that people do attack those who think differently, whether it's in politics or sport or whatever it might be. People can be really quite mean and nasty to other people. Whereas Jesus is saying that we're not to be like that. We are to be kind. We are to love our enemies. But the reason that he puts this particular verse in amongst all those other things is that God pours out his weather, his rain, and his sunshine upon everybody, whether they follow him or not. And so God doesn't just give the weather to people who trust him and follow him. He gives good weather to everybody. He doesn't just give rain to those who don't follow him. He gives rain to everybody. And because of that, because God shows that generosity towards everybody, even those who may be opposed to him, then that sets the example for us. In the same way that God is generous to everybody, we are to be generous to everybody, even those who we disagree with, even those who we might consider to be our enemies. Now, as I say, this is something that's very countercultural, isn't it? Because in general, we feel we may be justified in being nasty to somebody else. It might be the case of saying, he deserves me to be nasty to him. She deserves me to say something horrible because look at what they've done. Look at what they've said. But Jesus is saying here, no, we are not to be like that at all. He wasn't like that towards people who were against him. Even the people who opposed him, and yes, there were many of those, Jesus was never nasty and vindictive. He would tell them the truth, and he would tell them the truth very often in no uncertain terms. But it wasn't out of a sense of nastiness. It wasn't out of a sense of vindictiveness. It was because he was being truthful to them. And so we're not to be nasty and vindictive towards other people, and we're not to push other people out or try and be nasty to them if they oppose us. And so let's rejoice in the weather. That's the other thing I wanted to leave with you, as well as that lesson about loving our enemies. Let's also thank God for the weather that we have. Let's be more slow to complain about it if it's not exactly as we want it to be, because we need both the sun and the rain, don't we, to grow our crops. And also gives us the opportunity to pray for those countries in the world where they do need more rain, and pray that God will rain upon them as well. But we need to say thank you to God for the weather. Whoever we are, wherever we are, whatever situation we are in, God gives us the weather that he gives us. And so we can be grateful to him, and we can say thank you to him. And remember the example that the Lord Jesus Christ gives us of recognizing that the weather is for everybody, and God gives his grace and his mercy to everybody. And yes, everybody can and has the opportunity to put their trust in Jesus, whoever they are. they can come to him. And you, whoever you are this afternoon, you can come to Jesus. You can put your trust in him. He shows his goodness. He shares his weather. He shares all these other good things with all of us. And so all of us this afternoon can come to Jesus and thank him for being so good to us. Well, thank you so much for watching. It's good to have had you with us, and may the Lord bless you all.